This is White Plains Week, the weekly news roundup. With your moderator, John Bailey, editor and publisher of the daily internet newspaper White Plains Citizen Net Reporter. Jim Benaroff, editor and publisher of SuburbanStreet.com and WhitePlains.com. And Peter Katz, noted broadcaster and journalist. White Plains Week. What's happened? Who are the newsmakers? And what's in store for the future? The views and opinions expressed on this program are solely those of the participants. White Plains Week is presented Fridays at 7:30 and again on Mondays at 7 p.m. here on Channel 76. Now, White Plains Week.
Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. White Plains, and all you analysts out there. Enough already. John Bailey here with the City News Roundup show. I'm doing the show for 16 years now, this being the 16th, and I'm with, of course, the Yankee for all seasons, Peter Katz, and Jim Benaroff is on assignment. And Peter, you have headlines.
Indeed, I do have the headlines, John. And the daffodils have arrived on the first day of spring, despite a chilly white coating of snow. President Obama and President Raul Castro of Cuba make history together. 3 terrorists make a different kind of history at the airport and a metro station in Brussels, Belgium. The chairman of the Board of Legislators, Mike Kaplowitz, wants a new deal on Playland. The Board of Regents of the state of New York elects Dr. Betsy A. Rosa of the Bronx, Chancellor of the Board of Regents. She is unopposed in that vote. White Plains is on track for record sales tax revenues this fiscal year, despite February's take being down by 5% and January being down by 2%. The Westchester Mall redesigns its food court for the millennials with money. Cashless tolls are coming to the Tappan Zee Bridge April 23rd. Modular housing, we've heard about it, but should this be something White Plains planners should be pushing for? The Women's Club of White Plains celebrates its design of the city flag 68 years ago. There's a sunrise service coming up Easter Sunday, this coming Sunday, at the First Baptist Church here in White Plains. It begins at 6:10 a.m. John?
Thank you, Peter. And we go, of course, to our opening slide, and that is the daffodils that appeared at the White Plains Citizen Reporter headquarters this morning. We're taping on March 24th, and it just pointed out that the daffodils always make their deadline.
Well, they do,
yes,
don't they?
Yes, they do. Unlike some people. Right.
Interestingly, they survived the bit of a return of winter that we had. Can you imagine? We started spring with a snowstorm. Yes,
which was highly ballyhooed, but turned out to be just a trickle.
Well, not much for here on the this end of the snow storm. The other side, Long Island, for example, got a bit more snow than we did. And even as we speak, out in the West and Midwest,
out in the white states,
some areas have been pummeled by snow. Around the Denver area, they got absolutely clobbered. It was just amazing to see some of the springtime pictures of, snow a foot deep, 2 feet deep in some places out there. Amazing stuff.
It really is. I mean, the weather is very unpredictable, as the Weather Service continues to prove every day.
No, you know what? Even more amazing, John, this week was that history actually did take place in Cuba.
That's right, and here's a shot of some of that history. That is President Obama in the middle.
And on the right is Raul Castro, President of Cuba. On the left is Mrs. Obama, and just barely going out of screen on the left, one of the Obama's 2 children. Last week we said that history would be made this week, and indeed it was. It was Sunday, March 20th, when President Obama arrived in Havana, Cuba, for the first visit to Cuba by a U.S. president since Calvin Coolidge arrived
Silent cow.
in 1928. The fact that Cuban President Castro was not on hand at the airport to greet the President and Mrs. Obama and their children and the President's mother-in-law reflects the restraint with which both sides have been approaching this changing policy. Not only must years of Cold War hostility be overcome, but so too must the complications of U.S. politics when it comes to the Cuban issue. The President toured historic sites and neighborhoods in Havana, met with church leaders, gave a speech which was televised so the Cuban people could see it, attended a state dinner, and, as we saw in that photo, he went to a baseball game. Now, on the way into Havana on Sunday, this is what the island nation looked like from Air Force One, as the President and First Lady both did a little sightseeing through the airplane's windows just before the actual approach took place. Once on the ground, after greetings, there was a motorcade to a Havana hotel, and the President greeted the U.S. Embassy staff and their families, then a tour of Old Havana under umbrellas because of the rain, a stop at a cathedral, and even though it was raining, there were crowds of local residents waiting for a glimpse of the President and First Lady. Cubans gave buildings in Old Havana a fresh coat of paint, and American flags were hoisted alongside of Cuban flags, something many people felt they would never see. And the President was accompanied by U.S. business leaders who engaged in talks with Cuban officials. And for example, during the trip it was announced that Starwood Hotels would soon begin operating at least one existing hotel in Havana. And they're looking to build more newer hotels in Havana. Now, the President received some criticism for not cutting short his visit and returning to Washington after the attacks in Brussels. But the White House pointed out that the traveling White House always remains in touch with Washington, and the President can direct anything that's going on, and that the trip to Argentina, which followed the trip to Cuba, was very important for foreign policy. You know, and as we said, the President of the U.S. and the President of Cuba did get together. They shook hands. They were generally quite cordial, at least in public. And it's not often that you get to have an exhibition baseball game between a team from Tampa, the Tampa Rays here in the U.S., and the Cuban national team. Now, interestingly, just before the game, they did conduct a tribute to the victims of the terror attacks on Tuesday in Brussels, and as of our recording this morning, the death toll stands at 34. More than 200 injured.
Yeah, it's, well, what I think we should view this Obama visit to Cuba and the coming of this joyous holiday season for many religions, okay, is that there are two ways to go to proceed in life. You can take the negative path and live in fear, or you can take the positive path of tack and try and make a difference, to put aside those that would foment hate and destruction, and to come down on the positive side and be brave enough to go for the positive steps to make progress.
You know, John, that theme was echoed right here in the Hudson Valley on Wednesday when Secretary of Defense Ash Carter went to West Point, and here's a shot of him being escorted into the West Point facility. On the right of the picture, well, Carter is in the center. Just to his right is
with the blue tie.
Robert Casland, who's the superintendent of West Point, and Carter spoke to the cadets, and a portion of his speech dealt with the terror attacks in Belgium. And he pointed out that Brussels itself is an international city that hosts the NATO members, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization headquarters, and the European Union, and other institutions that represent people working together for a better future. And so his theme was that we all had better work together and work hard to defeat the terrorists, especially ISIS, which he referred to as ISIL. The Obama administration people all call it ISIL.
As I've said many times on this show, the way you defeat them is take away their money. And if we don't do that, we're just going to have this nuisance.
Well, there have been some efforts over the years to choke off the flow of
Not
cash
good ones,
to terrorists. However, when they have rather wealthy supporters throughout the world, when they have the ability to pump
if we know who they are, we should arrest them.
They pump oil into the black market, and there is a market. People buy the oil in order for them to make money selling their oil on the black market. There have to be people willing to buy that oil.
Right, and they are aiding and abetting a seditious organization.
Now, the other problem that they're up against, even in cutting off the economic funds, is that we are seeing increasingly they are dependent upon lone wolves, independents, who have been working undercover in places like Brussels, even in the United States, as we saw on the West Coast some time ago, and will pop up, will work on their own, do not require an inordinate amount of money to function, to do their dirty business. So
They're modern-day Comancheros is what they are.
Well, it's a rather complex situation. There are no easy answers. There's no simple, we'll knock them out if we just get tough with them, because it's much more complicated than just getting tough or angry. And what we're seeing in part, which is not very helpful in this presidential campaign, is an oversimplification of the situation which exists with respect to the terrorists, with respect to world politics, with respect to unrest in the Middle East, with respect to despots in North Korea and elsewhere.
Well, bluster. Bluster is the rule of the day on the presidential trail.
Hey, you can hear bluster everywhere. Now, we had some, what sounds not like bluster, but rather like some clear analysis over at the county office building this week.
Yes, and that's the shocker of the week.
And the shocker of the week shows
Mike Kaplowitz, the chairman of the Board of Legislators, sitting at a desk holding court with the media. We could not attend this news conference because it was opposite our taping last week. But he did put out an extensive 22-minute press conference video, which we will telecast next week on People to Be Heard in its entirety.
So check your newspapers for time and station.
8 o'clock Thursday and 7 o'clock on Saturday.
But at the news conference over at the county office building, Kaplowitz explained his thinking behind trying to renegotiate a deal with Standard Amusements to operate Playland, rather than just accepting what County Executive Astorino's office had put together.
To committing to make the deal better, and then giving our colleagues the best possible negotiated deal, and then we have a chance individually and collectively to decide, is this the best bottom line for the taxpayers? Because at the end of the day, that's what we're about. We're trying to find the best best situation for the taxpayer. So would we start an amusement park today in 2016? It would be a fun conversation, and we would say no municipality is going to go build an amusement park in 2016. You leave that to private industry. But at the same time, should we simply shutter Playland? The answer is clearly no. So we're coming up with the next best alternative, and we're working with the county executive who's given us this rough draft. We're working with the rough draft to make it a better draft. And I do think there's a path to victory here. I think there is an opportunity if we can get the indebtedness down, the taxpayer protected, Playland with a new operator can be reinvested, and we can have the next 80, 50, 90 years of a wonderful, rejuvenated Playland Park in Westchester County.
Now, John, as far as the numbers go, it's if you go into what he showed at this news conference, which was a rather large spreadsheet, your eyes may start to wilt somewhat under all of the detail there. But in general, what Kaplowitz says we need to do is to come up with a deal in which, if Westchester County and Standard Amusements are going to be partners in putting money into refurbishing Playland and putting money into operating Playland, then they need to be partners in taking out the profits. The county taxpayers should not be stuck with paying a lot of money up front, with having to float bonds that have to be paid off over a period of years to pay for the improvements that are necessary, without reaping some of the benefits, a fair amount of the benefits.
And he had said at the top of the press conference that at this point there are not the votes to go with this $58 million capital expenditure all on the county's part, but that they were going to, quote, kick the tires on all these projects that we've told you about on previous shows, and also showed you what they cost individually. However, he says that they have to reduce it to where Westchester invests only $30 million, and to
instead of having to put up $58 or $60 million all by ourselves. If we, the county taxpayers, put up $30 million, then Standard Amusements could put up $30 million of its own, and that covers a $60 million capital investment.
But he wasn't saying what he was looking for down the road in increased share of the profits. Didn't say that, and also pointed out how if they take if they get the attendance up to about 800,000, they will bring the debt service, even with the $30 million expenditure, down to below what it is today. Now, remember, the whole idea of getting Playland run by someone else was to eliminate debt service entirely, and that was forgotten in the last 2 years.
But interestingly, Kaplowitz did not express any intransigence.
It was a masterful performance.
And so what had been an adversarial situation just a few weeks ago between the legislature and the county executive now appears to be evolving into a spirit of cooperation and a desire to actually go ahead and do a deal, if it's at all possible, to come up with a deal which makes sense for both parties. And of course, no one wants to get into a deal that can't be properly negotiated. And we seem to have heard a lot of that in the presidential campaign, although the presidential campaign now has deteriorated into sounding...
Was it ever on high ground?
Compared to where it is today, yes, believe it or not. But I mean, no, you had Donald Trump being looked upon by many voters actually, and by himself, as a skilled negotiator, who certainly would have no problem coming to agreement with a would-be commercial operator of an amusement park, I would think. In fact,
we put the condos here, and we put the restaurants here, and we'll have these two rides here.
Just as a sidebar, Trump, we are told at one point, did want to buy Playland, actually, and close it up and turn the whole thing into some sort of real estate development.
Very valuable real estate now.
But on the national scene, what has happened is that there now is a very personal argument. Fight going on between Trump and Ted Cruz, his Republican opponent, all because a super PAC created an advertisement which has been running on television in some of the primary states supporting Ted Cruz, in which they use a photo of Trump's wife, Melania, who had posed nude in a photo shoot for GQ magazine.
When?
Some time ago.
Some time ago.
However,
another life.
They are using this. So Trump, of course, as you would expect, became livid on this, and so Trump has been attacking Cruz's wife.
Well, I think Mrs. Trump, all she has to do is sign a pledge, if Mrs. Cruz will sign a pledge, not to pose nude for GQ while they're first ladies.
Yeah.
What about that? I think that's fair, don't you?
So,
Cruz, this is ridiculous.
Cruz, what Cruz says is that Trump is being Trump squared here, and using this ad, which had the picture of Trump's wife posing in the GQ cover, or in the photo that was in GQ magazine.
Yes.
As Cruz says, this is just an excuse so Trump can attack his wife, just the way Trump has been attacking women up and down ever since he first attacked Carly Fiorina in the first Republican debate.
Right. Well, one woman who is above this fray is Dr. Betty A. Rosa, shown here, who was elected this week by the Board of Regents of the state of New York as Chancellor of the Board of Regents. And she was the only candidate suggested, and they approved her in that 15-0 with 2 abstentions.
Now, the question is, what makes Betty A. Rosa so special?
Well, she is from Puerto Rico, and she attended school in New York City, public elementary and junior high schools in the Bronx, and very familiar with growing up and being educated in city schools. She worked in the Department of Education as a bilingual paraprofessional, teacher, and reading coordinator, something our students have to know how to do or learn better how to read. And she has also worked in the central office of the NYC Board of Education, so she knows where the bodies are buried, so to speak. Now, I spoke with a person who has worked with Dr. Rosa in the past, is very familiar with her, and they said that he knew her as a regent, dealt with her as a principal, dealt with her on many occasions in the professional mode, and found her professional and friendly, very bright, tough, no nonsense. And he pointed out that she took on Michael Bloomberg and his education.
When he was mayor of New York.
Yes, right, and fought their efforts to withhold funding from schools that were not
well, Bloomberg, of course, took control of the New York City school system.
And his closing of schools, she fought that. So that was not brought out in any talk about her. So she is a fighter for the individual.
And do we
teacher.
know how she stands on this controversial matter of testing?
Well, she feels, we don't, but she is not a big fan of the way the testing is now. We do know that. And she also feels that it's very important to involve the parents. This was what my source said was one of her strengths at one of the schools she was head of, and she said that well, anyway, I'm losing my train of thought there. But one thing that she really has to do, and as does the Commissioner of Education, whom we talked about last week, they have to set a timetable for when the new Common Core standards are going to be achieved, and they also have to really consider in the new tests that are coming up this spring and next year that they have to do a control group test. In other words, using the previous Pearson tests, so that you can find out how much more your readers have improved compared to the tests that you threw out.
Well, you know, they're trying to improve certain things over at the Westchester Mall, speaking of improvements. And one thing that they're doing is redoing the food court over there, and we have found out that they are going to be calling it Savor Westchester, and they're going to try to appeal to a completely new type of audience, which is the millennials. If you look at the photograph, that's all you see. Or it's an artist rendering, actually.
Yeah, and
but that's all you see in there, young millennials coming in to dine at this new facility. They promise there will be 7 New York City restaurants represented in this new facility over at the Westchester. Maybe somehow that will contribute to the White Plains sales tax income. And interestingly, John, we have a bit of news on the sales tax, which seems to indicate that White Plains is going to do all right when we come to the end of the fiscal year in terms of the sales tax taken in, that it's on target for a record 54 million receipts.
Yes, and that would mean the city has plenty of extra dollars to satisfy all the unions that are without contracts.
Mm-hmm. And as if the city continues to need cash, it turns out that the Thruway Authority really doesn't care about cash that much. Especially if you have an easy pass. Well, they're not exactly free, but they're going to become cashless.
Yes.
April 23rd at 12:01 a.m. is when cashless tolls go into effect.
Right, those
on
are the
Tappan Zee
gantries.
Bridge.
They're going to read everything.
Over on the Rockland side, they have built that assemblage to read your Easy Pass transponder or to photograph your car's front and rear license plates so that they can send you a bill if you don't happen to have Easy Pass. Mm-hmm. And they will be advising people that even though the toll booths will remain on the Westchester side, you can go through them at 20 miles an hour, but they will be tearing down those toll booths, which have been the scene of countless traffic jams. There was no traffic jam over at the Playland parking lot this week.
No.
What there were a
what
whole
do you
bunch
think those are?
Well, it turns out that those are modular structures. They're modular apartments, which are going to be taken to Portchester and assembled into an apartment building. Yeah. And they're going to have
period of time.
They're going to have about 40 units going up, and so we wonder just how useful could modular housing be here in White Plains if you can put these things into an apartment building.
It took 2.5 years to build that very small 10-story building over on Winbrook. Now, if you could build modular housing faster, I think the city planning folks have got to take a look at that.
We've been told they can go up, as it is now, to 8 stories, and they can develop these using steel and concrete modular units.
Yeah, I know.
So who tells how high you can pile up these things?
Yeah. It also raises the question of whether the major players who are builders in the area are behind the times. They're not looking at better modular things. Just a thought, guys. You know.
In planning White Plains' future, is there a place for modular housing, and could that be the answer to the need for affordable housing?
Right. Now, there was an anniversary this week, and it was the Women's Club celebrated the fact that 68 years ago, in 1948, they presented a design for the city flag, which is shown in the middle there.
That's the mayor on the far right,
holding the new flag, today's flag, Mayor Tom Roach. And this was really a very nice story, and we'll
and that old newspaper clipping on the left has a picture.
Mayor Silas Clark on the right, back in 1948.
Wow.
And the Women's Club, I have to say this, really a great organization that is dedicated to the community and always is looking forward. Well, we look forward to next week. We'll talk to you on the radio. See you at the sunrise service on Sunday morning, right?
Easter Sunday.
That's right. And on the radio.
That's over at which church?
First Baptist Church, Bryant and North Street. John Bailey, Peter Katz, good night for White Plains Week.
White Plains Week has been a presentation of White Plains Citizen Net Reporter, WPCNR.com, in cooperation with Channel 76. Comments may be emailed to WPCNR@AOL.com. The copyrighted print White Plains Cityscape by Leonard Weber is used courtesy of the White Plains Presbyterian Church. For information on its availability, you may contact the church at 761-8585. The views and opinions expressed on the preceding program were solely those of the participants. White Plains Week is presented Fridays at 7:30 and again on Mondays at 7 p.m. here on Channel 76. For White Plains Week, this is Seth Benaroff speaking.